All right, we're going to be talking about some fossils of the Silurian Reef. And now remember, some of this is repeat, some of this is brand new and for kids who are sick. Now again, if we traveled back in time, we thought this was a portal, all the way back. Um, and we're going to go back in to see what Germantown looked like 425 million years ago. That's the rock that's out here. Because all the rock above it has been worn away by glaciers or eroding. So what's left out here is really old rock. And we could just see what would it be like. So we went back in time 425 million years ago. And we'd be back into a shallow marine environment, a shallow warm sea with different creatures than we'd see today. Now, this, if we wanted to, what we could do is maybe we wanted to say, hey, what are all those fossils in the rocks out here at County Line? They're right on the playground. You can see them. Um, what are they? Maybe we go fishing to see what they actually look like. So when we went back in time, if we plopped right in, oh my gosh, we'd be in trouble. Hopefully, we brought life raft along and some fishing rods. Now, the Silurian period lasted, it was at 425 million years ago. We were, North America was a shallow sea. And that covered Wisconsin now in Illinois. That's what's exposed because all the stuff above it got worn away. This is what a shallow sea would look like today. Back then, it looked like this. The first critters we would be seeing are brachiopods. They live on the bottom. They're bivalves. Bi means two. Two, valves mean they had two shells. They're considered living fossils because they have cousins that are alive today in the oceans. However, they are really rare. They look like clams and oysters, but they're not. They're not even related to them. What they did is they would use a pedicle, which is like a boat anchor, to get down to on the bottom. They would of the sea, and then they would float a little bit above, suck in the water, and filter it out, eat what's in there, little particles like plankton and algae, whatever floated around, and shot out the water that's clean. So they were like filters, like if you have in your fish tank, there would be the filters like that. Some of them did it where they were buried in the mud, and this would be like the mud right here, go deep down, and they would make little holes like this, and that way they could come up, and if something really was attacking them, they'd go back down into it to protect themselves. And again, a lot of the fossils we'll find on County Line Playground are in limestone like this. You'll see the remains of brachiopods. This one is a rare one. It's called Mucospirifer, but it's really pretty and it looks like a butterfly. So they kind of call it like this. If you look like a butterfly flapping around, even though it's not related to the butterfly, it just looks like it, and that's why they're nicknamed the butterfly shells. And you can see when they died, all their soft stuff would get, disintegrate and go eaten away, or things would eat it and be gone. But the hard shells got left behind. They're not alone. You'd have the brachiopods, and there'll be anything else that was living and would die down there. Here's a trilobite. So a lot of these are just a whole bunch of stuff put together. And again, they are living fossils. Trilobites also are extinct. They lived in the seas for many millions of years. They started off real simple and then got kind of fancy. They were really small to like this size, and they were to really big. They ate plants. Some of them ate plants. Some of them ate cane, and some were just scavengers. Anything that would die. They're very similar to like crabs would be today, or horseshoe crabs, and they kind of look like roly poly bugs, but they too. But they would go around in the bottom of the sea looking for stuff to eat. And they could even most of them were on the bottom, but they could swim around. If some of them swam in the freely in the water column. And again, a lot of them could roll up like a roly-poly bug here, or a pill bug, they're called, um, and to protect themselves. They wore their armor on the outside exoskeleton. They're named after the 3 lobes here, but what we're gonna know them for is we also know they also have 3 body segments this way: the cephalon, which is the head, thorax, which is the body, and the pygidium, which is the tail. They had feet and legs and gills to breathe in the water and get the oxygen. When they had to grow, they had to molt because, they didn't add on, so what they had to do is they would crawl out of their shell um, and then grow another suit of armor on the outside. So here again, with his head down, it splits open, and then he can crawl out that little door, crawl out, and then he leaves his old one behind, and he grows a new one. They could carry their babies right onto their body there to protect them. And again, they had these compound eyes, many, many eyes around so they could see in all different directions. And it was very advantageous to, instead of where how we have to turn our heads, they um, they could just look. They looked at all the time in all directions to see if who's out there, something to eat or something's going to attack them. And they had after a while, they thought they grew spines, in case something would eat them that they would choke on them or get it would hurt to eat. So these guys had were defensive adaptation. So, again, if a fish came, try to swallow him up, these would poke him in the mouth and he'd spit it out, or if he went down too far, he'd probably choke on it. Some even had stalks on their like their eyeballs on those stalks, so they could be in the mud, poke these out, look around like a periscope. This guy, he changed his antenna into one, and then had three at the end, like a trident. We built a model. Now, cephalopods, or straight-shelled cephalopods, we talked about these. They're like having an arm, like a cone here, and squid-like body, tentacles and a beak, big eye, and these are important because you'll see the shells around. You won't see this part. Sometimes those preserve like in the mud, leave a mark. It can't. These guys are pretty ferocious too. So they could pull in with the tentacles towards their mouth. They had like a little siphon where they sucked in water and blew it out and jet skied around. But if they got real big, they're pretty slow because this shell protected them. It was pretty heavy. So, and then they would have this cap. So if they did pull into their shell, they could close that door. These are ones that you can get to where there's a whole bunch of them. That's called Orthoceras, and he was, these are all their shells that would die down and put them together. Nice about these, you can see the chambers as these guys grew. They just added on to their house. So start off small, just add a little addition onto it as they grow. They did not molt. And you could squirt around in jet, and they could have ink. If you look right here, nice. They had a stomach here. Here's their beak. Here's that little hood. Here's where they sucked in the water, shot it out. Gills, so when they were sucking in the water, they could get the oxygen. Heart up here, and they had different types of chambers as they went on, and they had some of them had like air in it, so they could go up and down. Some of these are get really big, like 6 feet. When we go to the Cape of the Mountains, you'll see one 6 feet tall. Ammonites are another one. They're extinct also. They are related to like the cuttlefish and the nautiloids and the squid and octopi. Now they had tentacles and a beak also, and a big, here's his eye, here's the tentacles, and he had a beak in there. And instead of being a straight shell, this guy curled around. As again he grew, he would grow another little layer, another little addition into it, and then these were little air chambers, so they could go up and down in the sea. Um, So again, he could float. He jetted around again. He sucked in water right down here. He jetted that around to scooch around. Some of them were really tiny. Some were very large. As we see this too, these are called trace fossils that geologists use. They look at this and say, "Hey, um, this, I see this fossil here, and this is a fossil that lived in the sea. So this rock must have been deposited in a marine environment." So if we see ammonites as a good trace fossil that says, "Oh, a marine rock." Some of them have opalized. They look really pretty. These are the little suture lines that kinda those chambers together. Sometimes they're just straight across, sometimes they have these little, like, ins and out. Some of 'em are opalized, and they're called amylite then, and they make it into jewelry, and we built one. Coral is one we just talked about today, and coral it is around Wisconsin a lot. You'll see it like this. Looks like a beehive or something like that, or a honeycomb, but it really isn't. In there was something that this lived in the sea, and in each one of those little teeny openings there, a little tiny animal lived who had like little tentacles that came up the mouth, and he would grab anything that was floating by and eat it. And he this was his home he lived in. So and then he would something came by, he would scooch in. When he died, all the soft stuff went away. He just left behind his home. Some look like green coral. Here's a coral here. And this is the Petoskey stone. Petoskey stone, again, each one of these little openings was an animal. That's his home. And again, here again, the Petoskey stone, and we know that legend. Some look like horns. And then we have the famous gastropod. Gastro means stomach, pod means foot. This guy had his on his foot, he had his stomach, so he could eat as he moved along. So if you think about SpongeBob and Gary, he moves around on the bottom, and he would scrape all the stuff off with a radula. It's like this little sandpaper mouth that just scrapes off stuff and eats it. Um, and you look right here. Here's where he comes out. That's right down on the bottom. As he moves across, he can eat if it's good stuff he wants to eat. In fish tanks, you'll find these too, where they clean a lot of the algae right off, and that's just a little area where his mouth scrapes it all up, whatever it is, and then puts it to his mouth. And these are very common to find in Wisconsin and especially in Illinois. There's some crinoids are called feather stars or sea lilies. Um, they look like that they're a plant, but they're not. Um, there are echinoderms, which means spiny skin. They're harmless and among the most ancient and primitive life forms that we have. And what they did is they would hold fast on the bottom here, like anchor it down. These are like little columns or stocks where they look like little buttons put together all around, or like your vertebra in your back. Here in the middle is where his like mouth and all that stuff would be, and arms right here. These would just float around, and then and grab things that are floating, and then bring it down to the mouth and the rest of the body. Um, when he died, the column would break apart into these little teeny parts right here, and they look like buttons. They're actually called buttons because as this little column here, again, is held together by some soft tissue, it'll be broken apart and it falls down to the ground. So once you see those, you know you have crinoid stems. Like this one here is found on County Line Playground. This is like the mouth area of him. So here again, here's his fossil of where there's bringing it down. Right around here is where it's bringing it to his mouth and down to the body. So this is like the mouth area, and that was found right here in County Line Playground, right by the basketball courts. So again, he looks like a plant, but he's not. You can also find tons of these on Lake Michigan. And a kind of you've got fossil sea urchins too. They have like a one, two, three, four, like five when it's not on their back. It would look like this, but these still spines kind of fall off when it dies. Um, and then they leave this kind of fossil around. And then you get some different ones like brittle starfish you'll find. And again, you can see the mouth part right in here. And in northern Illinois and and in southeastern Wisconsin, you'll definitely find something that looks like this. This is a weird one. And it is how algae, like that green algae, kind of just forms like a pattern into it and then fossilizes. It kind of looks like a basket weave or like sometimes people think they're like fossilized corn flour in the inside of the flour, but it isn't. It's actually a fossilized algae. You'll find those around too, not more in Illinois than here. All right, and then we're going to later on watch this sea monster one, which is a little later. So these are your common fossils that you will find in Wisconsin, especially like our area in southeastern Wisconsin, and you can find them right on county line. And if you ever go hiking around Lake Michigan, you definitely find on right on there a lot of these, especially coral, crinoids, brachiopods. A little more rare to find trilobites, but you can. Trilobites are more found into our like on the Milwaukee River a little bit more, and then. You'll find straight-shelled cephalopods on there, and definitely the trilobites. Remember, trilobite is actually our state fossil. Okay, I hope you learned a little bit more about fossils, and I hope this helped.